Hello, and welcome to Counseling Ethics Lecture 9. My name is Dr. Amber Hughes. In this lecture, I want to talk about counselor responsibilities. As counselors, we enter into a relationship with another person in order to help them. This relationship should not be taken lightly and impacts both the client and the counselor. However, as a counselor, you are in a position of power over and responsibility for your clients. Some of these responsibilities include honoring diversity, being aware of one's own needs and values, avoiding dependent relationships. Remember, I mentioned we really strive to help our clients become independent of us. Respecting the rights of involuntary or mandated clients. These are a vulnerable population in a way because they're forced to come to counseling and forced to enter into this relationship. We use appropriate counseling techniques, appropriate for the population, appropriate for the diagnosis or issue, appropriate for the developmental level of the client. We manage interruptions in and termination of services appropriately, and we avoid abandonment of clients without ethically terminating. As with multicultural competency, counselors must explore their own needs and values to ensure they are maintaining an appropriate relationship. It is vitally important for counselors to be aware of their own needs and motivations in order to maintain an ethical relationship that keeps client welfare first and foremost. Without this awareness, counselors run the risk of meeting their own needs at the expense of the client. How does this possibly happen, you ask? Right? We're counselors. We're here to help others, not to help ourselves. Now, we do have people who intentionally manipulate their clients. This is unfortunate but rare. What typically happens, however, is not unlike our personal internalized biases I talked about in the previous lecture. Counselors are unintentional in putting their own needs before their clients. For example, I recently was supervising a counseling student who was in her practicum. She was working with an adolescent girl who was hospitalized for a suicide threat. This counseling student was very invested in her client, as she should have been, and she had spent a lot of time working with her. The girl was a student. She was a senior, and her dad was aware of the situation, and her dad decided that school was causing her more stress than helping. And so in helping her and trying to help her finish, because she just had a semester to go, he pulled her out of school and was working with the school counselor to help her finish her credits online. This counseling student felt like this was a horrible idea, and she was worried that the student wouldn't end up graduating. She was worried that it would impact her ability to go to college, which the client had expressed as being something she wanted to do. The counseling student, however, had gotten to a point where she was starting to take this client's case very personally. She felt like a failure. She felt like she had not succeeded in helping this girl. She wanted so badly for this girl to succeed. However, I feel like that desire was really focused on herself. Okay? She had gotten to a point where she was doing the work for the client. She was doing research on colleges, on college applications, and so on. Because she wanted so much for this girl to go to college. The student was starting to act unethically, but it was in no way intentional. Rather, she was taking on some of her client's progress as a reflection of herself, and she didn't want to fail herself. Now, counselors have the right to their own needs, and some of these will be met through their work with clients. For example, you're going to get a sense of satisfaction and fulfillment by helping others. I love doing career counseling because it's kind of an immediate satisfaction a lot of times, more so than mental health. Mental health counseling can take quite some time to see progress. With career counseling, we see more immediate progress, and I love it. It makes me feel good. It makes me feel good to know that I have made a difference in others' lives. And I'm not doing a lot of career counseling now, and I miss that. Okay? However, we really have to work to avoid fostering client dependency and enabling. This can be due to your overly strong need to nurture others and to help others. You shouldn't take this lightly, because I know so many of you are here because you want to help others and you want to fix problems. All right. But as I mentioned, this is how I responded to the counseling student that I mentioned in the previous example. We aren't in the business of fixing. Okay? We are in the business of facilitating change in other people. And so you really have to temper your own need to help whenever you go into counseling, as a counselor. You should really try to avoid inappropriate forms of countertransference. So this is where you're putting your own needs onto your clients. You're kind of allowing them to take a role that's inappropriate. All right, maybe they remind you of someone else. Maybe they remind you of yourself. In my example of the counseling student, I think there was some countertransference going on there. For some reason, she had really taken hold of this client she was counseling and was exhibiting some countertransference in how she was reacting to what she saw as her client's lack of success. There are some pros to this, but you have to be really advanced in your counseling skills to be able to do countertransference appropriately. You have to be able to manage it. You also want to avoid misusing the natural sense of power you hold in the relationship to benefit yourself versus the client. You are going into a position of power in this relationship, and it's really something we strive to avoid. We strive to equalize that power, but we still have it, and you can never get rid of it in this relationship. And so you want to be careful of what that power gives you, and the influence that you have over your client, because you do. Our code of ethics speaks specifically to counselor responsibilities in this relationship. Standard A4B of the Code of Ethics requires that counselors be aware of and avoid imposing their own values, attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors on clients. And again, this is something that we've talked about in the previous lectures. The influence of counselor values on the counseling process can be very subtle, however. Counselors can communicate their values in many indirect ways by nonverbal responses, so those facial expressions. I know that I am horrible with facial expressions. My face just moves in ways without me even realizing it. And so that's something you have to be aware of. You have to know when you're doing it and be intentional about keeping your face more neutral. Focusing on some elements of a client's story while not responding to others. So if you haven't already, you're going to learn some basic counseling skills and techniques. And some of those basic skills are questioning and paraphrasing, where we're repeating back just brief words or components of a client's story to help them continue talking. However, what we choose to focus on is very powerful in directing where the client goes with the story. We can also obviously be influential in the interventions we select. Research shows that the degree of congruence between the values of the counselor and those of the client can influence therapeutic outcomes. So even though we try to bracket our values, it seems that they still play a part in how well the client does in therapy. Clients tend to change in ways that are consistent with the values of their counselor. So again, even though we're supposed to be bracketing our values, sometimes they're coming out and they're influencing how our client chooses to act and chooses to change. So it's very important that we're aware of this, aware of the fact that we can't eliminate those values, and we account for that whenever we do our counseling. Finally, I want to speak more about dependency in the counseling relationships. Counselors must avoid fostering dependent counseling relationships with clients. The goal of counseling should be one to moving clients toward an increasing autonomy and independence in their everyday life issues, rather than being dependent on us to help them make decisions and to help them make change. Counselors should avoid the possible temptation to foster dependency due to a desire to feel needed, a need to nurture others, a need to feel important and indispensable, or a need for income from easy client fees. So most of my examples, except for that last one, can happen really unintentionally, right? We like to feel needed. We like for people to like us. We want to help. And so those natural feelings and desires we have can influence how we do counseling. It's really important to have boundaries whenever you go into the counseling profession. Now that last one, a need for income from easy client fees. Whenever you have a client who is very needy and you foster that dependence, they're going to keep coming back to you. So they're going to keep paying you. This is a more intentional manipulation of your clients, and you should certainly avoid it. Client needs may also foster a dependent relationship. Some clients attempt to maintain or even increase their dependency on the counselor for various reasons. For example, most of my work has been with college students, right? When I was doing career counseling with college students, I often had clients come into career counseling wanting to be told what to do. It was sometimes a challenge to help them make decisions or even just do simple tasks on their own, right? Helping them think of their own interests, getting them to talk about themselves. Some of that was really hard because they were young, they were new to college, they maybe weren't sure of what their interests were, of what they even wanted, and maybe they were used to being told what to do, used to being told what classes to take by their high school counselors, maybe their parents, and they were also very likely scared to make the wrong decision. And so they wanted me to tell them. Excuse me. They would tell me just to tell them what to do. However, as counselors, we have to balance ongoing support with encouraging independence and even risk-taking, because there is a lot of risk-taking in making changes in our lives. And it can be scary. And so we have to support that, the emotions and the fear involved with being independent and with making changes in our lives, while helping them learn how to do so. As counselors work to uphold their ethical obligations to avoid fostering dependency and to promote client change or client independence and autonomy, they sometimes misapply the principle of autonomy. Okay? We have to remember that autonomy is a highly individualistic concept, and that the counseling goal of achieving individual independence or autonomy may not be appropriate for clients whose choices are made in the context of family, group, or community. All right, so we want clients to be independent and autonomous, certainly of us. However, we need to be aware of the cultural and family context of the client. It may not be appropriate for them to make choices based on who. And again, going back to career counseling, a lot of times I would ask my clients, what do you want to be? Forget about your parents, forget about your family, and really try to understand what they wanted out of life. That was maybe inappropriate, certainly for some clients, but for most of us, I know I have never made a decision without my family, without considering my family, right? And so I would expect college students to do so. Also, when I was working both as an academic advisor and as a career counselor, we spent a lot of time really encouraging and fostering that independence from parents. So it was really systematic. Whenever they come for their first orientation, we separate them from their parents. We try to keep parents out of the advising room. However, this really always seemed to me to be an unrealistic expectation. I, again, remember my own decisions. I remember when I was 18, I went to see my academic advisor during that orientation, and I made my schedule, and I went back home, and I showed my mom and dad, and my dad said, no, this isn't going to work. And so he marched me, this was before computers when you could do everything online, he marched me back into the advising office, and he said, she needs to change her schedule. Yes, my dad is overbearing. Yes, my dad makes too many choices for me, but he was right. My schedule was inappropriate for me. He knew that I needed my schedule to be in a certain way. He knew that the advisor had all these breaks in there. She hadn't really thought about planning my schedule out, and my dad knew that I would want to go to class because I was living on campus, but our apartments were significantly off campus. He knew I wasn't going to want to hang around for an hour. And so he asked her to rearrange my schedule so that I didn't have any breaks. I could go from class to class and then go home. And that's important though, right? Especially when these kids are young. It's important for them to have the input from their parents because they don't know, they don't think about these things. And so even though we assumed that they were making decisions themselves, they weren't. They were still going back home like I did and talking to their parents and then making decisions. So I made sure as an advisor and as a career counselor to involve parents when I could, as much as I legally could, right? So because of FERPA, I couldn't give them student information without having permission. However, I talked to so many parents on the phone, just letting them know what the process was, just letting them know where we were in the semester, all things that I could tell them and all things that I knew that they were then going to go on and tell their kids, right? I would tell them about rules. I would tell them about policies. I would tell them again, hey, finals are coming up. Here's how your kid might look up their finals, right? And it helped reassure the parents, but I also assumed it helped the students as well, because again, they were getting their information from their parents. So some final thoughts. You will be impacted by your relationships with your clients, even if you think it won't happen. It is going to. To help make sure you are maintaining an ethical relationship, keep yourself mentally healthy. Really focus on that self-care and do your own processing with supervisors and colleagues on a regular basis.